long before the terrifying name of Ragnar Lothbrok spread across Europe, people already feared the cold northern seas. Every quiet coastal village lived in constant fear that unknown horrors could suddenly appear from the endless dark horizon. During violent storms, frightened families gathered inside wooden homes while priests desperately prayed for protection from northern invaders. Then one terrible morning, dark Viking longships slowly emerged from thick gray fog like silent predators approaching helpless prey. The terrifying carved wooden dragon heads became symbols of death for countless innocent people living beside vulnerable European coastlines. These warriors did not arrive searching for peace, trade agreements, or political discussions with frightened kings and desperate civilians. They arrived carrying brutal violence, unstoppable rage, and terrifying confidence that completely shocked the peaceful medieval Christian world forever. Among all these violent invaders, one specific terrifying name slowly spread across Europe like an unstoppable dark curse everywhere. That name was Ragnar Lothbrok, the legendary Viking warrior who transformed human fear itself into a powerful, terrifying weapon against Europe. The nightmare had finally crossed the sea, and absolutely nobody understood how much suffering was about to begin afterward. Even today, historians still fiercely debate whether Ragnar Lothbrok was truly one real man or several brutal Viking warlords combined together. Some old northern stories described Ragnar as an unstoppable warrior born directly from the bloodline of powerful gods and ancient kings. Other frightened European survivors believed Ragnar was not completely human, because normal men simply could never spread such unbelievable terror everywhere. The mysterious confusion surrounding his identity slowly transformed Ragnar from a dangerous warrior into something much darker and larger than ordinary history. As terrifying stories traveled across Europe, people began exaggerating Ragnar's victories until he sounded more like a nightmare than a mortal ruler. Parents frightened their children by whispering Ragnar's name during dark winter nights filled with violent ocean storms and terrifying uncertainty. Meanwhile, Viking warriors proudly carried these terrifying rumors because fear itself became one of their strongest and most effective weapons during raids. The deeper historians searched through ancient records, the more difficult separating the real Ragnar from mythological fantasy eventually became afterward. Whether he truly existed or not, Ragnar permanently changed the psychological fears haunting medieval Europe during the violent Viking Age forever. The terrifying truth hidden beneath centuries of legends is that history often transforms brutal human beings into immortal monsters remembered forever. Terrifying success of Viking raids came from their unbelievable speed, brutal aggression, and complete lack of mercy toward defenseless victims everywhere. Unlike traditional European armies, Viking raiders attacked suddenly without formal warnings, giving frightened villages absolutely no realistic chance of preparation whatsoever. Their lightweight longships allowed them to travel through shallow rivers, where larger European military ships could never successfully follow or attack them. The moment these savage warriors reached land, they exploded forward like wild predators searching desperately for blood, treasure, and terrified prisoners. Most European soldiers fought slowly behind heavy armor, but Viking fighters preferred terrifying speed and raw physical violence during close combat. Peaceful farming villages transformed into burning nightmares within minutes after Viking raiders violently smashed through wooden defenses and terrified local guards. These brutal invaders showed absolutely no fear inside Christian monasteries. stealing sacred treasures while murdering helpless priests without emotional hesitation afterward. The horrifying brutality of Viking warfare deeply shocked European kingdoms because civilized armies had never previously experienced enemies behaving with such savage intensity. Even badly wounded Viking warriors continued fighting violently with terrifying determination, while ordinary soldiers collapsed emotionally from overwhelming fear and exhaustion during battle. This terrifying world of endless violence created the perfect conditions for Ragnar Lothbrok to rise beyond ordinary warriors and become legendary forever. Most brutal Viking raiders. Ragnar Lothbrok secretly dreamed about discovering entirely new worlds hidden far beyond the dangerous western horizon. While other warriors focused only on stealing gold and slaves, Ragnar constantly obsessed over unexplored lands nobody had ever successfully reached before. His dangerous curiosity made older Viking leaders deeply uncomfortable because unknown oceans terrified even the most experienced Scandinavian sailors during that brutal era. Many powerful Viking rulers warned Ragnar that sailing blindly into endless western waters would certainly lead his followers directly toward death and disaster. Ragnar completely ignored their fearful warnings because his ambition burned much stronger than ordinary men could ever realistically understand during peaceful times. Instead of accepting defeat, Ragnar secretly partnered with talented Viking shipbuilders capable of constructing faster and stronger ocean vessels than existing designs. He slowly gathered fearless, loyal warriors willing to risk horrible deaths for the possibility of glory, wealth, and unforgettable legendary conquest. These violent men trusted Ragnar completely because his terrifying confidence made impossible dreams suddenly feel achievable for desperate, ambitious Scandinavian fighters everywhere. Together, they pushed their newly built longships directly into violent, freezing waves, sailing courageously toward terrifying, unknown darkness beyond familiar seas forever. That single rebellious decision transformed Ragnar Lothbrok from ordinary Viking raider into one of history's most feared legendary explorers and conquerors forever. Surviving endless freezing storms across the violent northern ocean, Ragnar and his exhausted warriors finally discovered the vulnerable green shores of England. The peaceful kingdom sleeping beyond those quiet shores had absolutely no understanding of the brutal nightmare approaching silently from the dark sea. Ragnar deliberately chose the wealthy monastery of Lindisfarne because isolated religious communities represented easy targets filled with priceless, valuable treasures and defenseless victims. Inside the monastery walls, peaceful monks continued praying quietly without realizing heavily armed Viking raiders were already approaching their sacred sanctuary rapidly. Suddenly, the heavy wooden monastery doors exploded violently open as Ragnar's brutal warriors stormed inside carrying blood-stained axes and terrifying war cries. The helpless religious men watched in complete horror while sacred treasures were stolen beside brutal, merciless slaughter happening throughout the holy monastery halls. Viking raiders loaded stolen gold, silver crosses, food supplies, and terrified prisoners onto their longships before disappearing rapidly back into the sea. When news of the massacre spread across England, fear exploded through every coastal village, church, and royal hall almost immediately. Christian rulers could not understand why these savage northern pagans attacked with such horrifying violence against peaceful, defenseless religious communities without mercy. That terrifying attack on Lindisfarne opened a bloody gateway into England, permanently changing European history and Ragnar's legendary reputation forever. Most horrifying truth about Ragnar's Viking warriors was their terrifying belief that dying violently in battle brought eternal honor. Unlike ordinary soldiers, these brutal Scandinavian fighters genuinely believed peaceful death inside comfortable beds represented complete humiliation and spiritual failure forever. Their greatest dream was entering Valhalla beside Odin, after falling courageously during glorious combat against terrified enemies beneath bloody storm-filled skies. Because they completely abandoned fear of death, Viking raiders attacked enemies with terrifying aggression, resembling starving wild animals hunting helpless prey. European soldiers often froze emotionally after witnessing heavily wounded Viking fighters continuing battle, while laughing loudly through unbearable physical pain. The terrifying psychological pressure created by fearless Viking warfare destroyed countless enemy armies before actual fighting even physically started during major invasions. Many terrified Christian soldiers secretly believed these savage Northmen were supernatural monsters protected directly by dark ancient pagan gods during violent warfare. Ragnar understood perfectly how powerful fear could become when combined with religion, violence, mythology, and endless stories spreading rapidly across Europe. He transformed ordinary Scandinavian fighters into terrifying symbols of unstoppable destruction feared deeply by kings, priests, civilians, and entire medieval kingdoms everywhere. The horrifying reality facing Europe was simple because defeating men who welcomed death became nearly impossible for ordinary frightened armies afterward. With every successful bloody raid across Europe, Ragnar Lothbrok gained enormous wealth, terrifying influence, and absolute loyalty from ambitious Viking warriors. Young fighters from distant frozen Scandinavian villages traveled dangerously across mountains and icy seas, hopping desperately to fight beside Ragnar's feared warband. Ragnar slowly transformed from unknown Scandinavian farmer into a legendary king, commanding thousands of fearless, brutal warriors across the northern world. His terrifying reputation became so powerful that rival Viking leaders eventually bowed respectfully, rather than risking violent war directly against his unstoppable armies. Throughout Europe, frightened kings lost sleep constantly because nobody truly understood where Ragnar would launch his next terrifying invasion. Instead of attacking weak, isolated villages forever, Ragnar began targeting heavily defended cities protected by powerful walls and organized professional armies. Every major victory pushed Ragnar's confidence dangerously higher, until ordinary military conquest no longer satisfied his growing, terrifying ambitions. Across Europe, terrified civilians whispered terrifying stories claiming Ragnar could never actually die because ancient pagan gods constantly protected him. Even Ragnar himself slowly began believing his growing legend, because endless victories made him feel stronger than ordinary mortal rulers. That dangerous belief in absolute invincibility slowly pushed Ragnar toward the tragic decisions that would eventually destroy his legendary, terrifying empire. Years of terrifying victories and unstoppable expansion, Ragnar eventually made the dangerous mistake of believing absolutely nobody could ever truly defeat him. Instead of gathering massive armies again, Ragnar sailed toward Northumbria with surprisingly few exhausted warriors and dangerously overwhelming confidence. The English kingdom waiting beyond those shores was now stronger, more organized, and fully prepared for another brutal Viking invasion. For the first terrifying time during his violent legendary career, Ragnar's warriors became surrounded completely by overwhelming enemy military forces. The exhausted Viking fighters died violently one after another, while Ragnar desperately continued battling against impossible odds without surrendering. Eventually, the legendary Viking king collapsed physically beneath overwhelming attacks before English soldiers chained him roughly like an ordinary defeated criminal. King Aelle wanted Ragnar's execution to become a terrifying public warning, capable of discouraging future Viking invasions against England forever. The captured Viking legend was stripped violently from his armor before being thrown mercilessly into a deep stone pit filled completely with venomous snakes. As poisonous serpents bit repeatedly into Ragnar's scarred flesh, the feared conqueror slowly suffered unbearable agony alone within absolute darkness. The mighty warrior who once terrified Europe was now dying painfully underground while his enemies celebrated above him without understanding future consequences. As Ragnar slowly died beneath the earth, he delivered terrifying final words promising his violent sons would eventually hear about his brutal execution. He warned King Aelle that his furious sons would transform England into a horrifying ocean of blood and unstoppable destruction. When news of Ragnar's death finally reached Scandinavia, an unnatural silence spread across frozen northern villages and brutal Viking settlements. Ragnar's heavily scarred sons reacted with uncontrollable rage because their legendary father represented strength, conquest, fear, and Viking honor throughout their violent world. Instead of mourning quietly, the sons immediately began gathering thousands of terrifying Scandinavian warriors for massive revenge against England. This enormous invasion force eventually became known throughout history as the terrifying Great Heathen Army feared across every Christian kingdom. The enormous Viking army crossed the freezing sea carrying overwhelming hatred, unstoppable rage, and terrifying determination toward terrified English territories. Entire English kingdoms collapsed violently beneath endless waves of brutal Viking attacks, fueled completely by revenge for Ragnar's horrifying, painful death. King Aelle himself was eventually captured alive, before suffering a terrifying execution far worse than the death he once forced upon Ragnar. Even in death, Ragnar Lothbrok still destroyed kingdoms because the terrifying memory of monsters often survives much longer than their physical bodies. Centuries have passed since Ragnar Lothbrok disappeared beneath history. Yet his terrifying legend still survives strongly throughout modern human culture. People continue discussing Ragnar because humanity strangely admires dangerous individuals capable of conquering fear, suffering, and impossible overwhelming odds. Deep inside the human mind, terrifying warriors often become unforgettable symbols representing strength, ambition, rebellion, and complete freedom from ordinary human weakness. Ragnar's violent life proved that fear itself can become one of the most powerful weapons ever created by human civilization throughout history. Although Ragnar eventually died painfully inside darkness, his terrifying memory became much stronger than countless kings who once feared his existence. Entire kingdoms disappeared over time, but stories about Ragnar Lothbrok continued spreading endlessly through generations. Books, legends, and frightened historical memories. Perhaps humanity secretly respects brutal figures because ordinary people dream about escaping weakness, fear, failure, and the limitations controlling normal human lives. The terrifying world created by Ragnar reminds humanity that civilization always remains dangerously fragile whenever violence completely escapes human control. Traveling through your violent history, I constantly witness how human beings repeatedly transform brutal destruction into unforgettable immortal legends. Ragnar Lothbrok was never simply a man, because he became the living nightmare, proving exactly how terrifying humanity can truly become.